Shake, rock and roll, shake, rock and roll, shake, rock and roll. Now you know we're gonna get ready with Breakfast with Bob. Woo!
Poncho Man, everybody! Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Day 4, Breakfast with Bob. We are brought to you by EAS Bioplex, Polar, Hoka, One, Velo Fix, Normatec, Four Seasons, Hualalai, where we have our championship edition on Sunday, Aero Power Breather, and, of course, we are at beautiful Huggles on the Rocks. Our next guest, the 3-time Ironman World Champion, and the gentleman who still holds the course record here in Kona, Mr. Craig Alexander. Yeah. We've never had a gallery before.
It's awesome. You need to do it more often.
How fun is that?
Yeah, thanks for the nice intro, mate. Thank you.
Oh, are you kidding? We love it. So, is it hard for you not to be racing?
Yes and no. I mean, on race day, it's now 3 years removed from when I raced. In the first year, definitely.
Gets easier.
I'm hoping it does, yeah. Last year was still difficult. I feel better this year. I mean, at some point, 1 year's going to be your last year, and I was happy with what I was able to do out here. I got great support from the family. I had a really good run out here, and now I'm doing some other things, but I still get to, it's a privilege to come back as a past champion and experience the week and get to hang out with all the athletes who are racing and really just immerse yourself in the industry. So I've had a great week so far.
What's fascinating to me is years ago, I'd interview a Norman Stadler or guys like that, and they were like, hey, I won last year. There's so much more pressure on me. There's all these interviews I have to do. They looked at it almost as as not just an obligation, but just more of a pain. And you were always one of those guys who said, listen, if they're not wanting me to be there, if they're not wanting to do interviews with me, that's a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, what do we say? The only thing worse than being in demand is not being in demand. So it's flattering that people want to invite you places, and I think it's part of being a professional athlete. You know, for a long time, you understand it's all about performance and nothing else. And then you get to a point where you become valuable to companies, but it's a partnership, and you have to show that value in places other than just the race course. And it's part of your job. I mean, you watch the NBA now, they're doing interviews on the court at halftime. Yes. I mean, you have to make yourself available. And it's hard because it depends on the kind of person you are and the kind of person. Norman's a very private sort of a guy. He loves to race, as was Peter Reed.
Yes,
and they're both
Peter's
great
same.
guys,
Yep.
Gentlemen, but they didn't do the sport for the adulation, or they did the sport for the like everyone does, for the, I guess, the personal challenge of racing. But it's what comes with the territory as well. So you can either embrace it or not. It's a decision like everything.
You had immediate success here. First time out in 07, and then 08 and 09 you win. You've got a formula, right?
I thought I did, yeah.
You thought you did, right? Had a great formula. You won 2 years in a row. 2010, things changed. People, they targeted you. Aggressive on the bike between Kauai High, Hawi, and back. Got a gap. And so you had to reinvent yourself after that year. How did you do that? And how did you adapt to that?
I think it's every athlete's goal to be versatile. I mean, for me, the great athletes are a couple of things. They're consistent and they're versatile. So, you know, I studied the sport, as you and I have talked about. I saw how Dave and Mark had success here. I saw how Paula had success here. I didn't think there were too many secrets. You had to do certain things and race a certain way, make smart decisions, obviously train well and get in great physical shape. So I tried to do those things and emulate those great athletes in the first few years. And I think when you do something that brings success, you tend to stick with it until you're forced to change. And, you know, sports evolve, athletes evolve. And, I mean, what happened in 2010 forced me to change the way I prepared and to look at all avenues of my game, not just training, but mental game, equipment, everything. And also the way I executed on race day. And I think if you spoke to any athlete, they'd tell you that's an opportunity. You get to do, I guess, play in the sandpit in a little different way. So I knew the kind of athlete I was. I think when you do things a certain way, you get pigeonholed a certain way.
Right.
I didn't care how people perceived me. My main thing was I knew how I was trying to execute, and I was able to do that. But 2011 gave me an opportunity to change things up a little bit, and it was very, very enjoyable.
And number one is the guys attacked you on the bike. You had to adapt, right? And he showed up when I saw you in 11. You got an aero helmet. Yeah. You had a different bike. everything, you changed, you adapted, and then you were at the pointy end of, you were dictating what was happening on the bike. That changed things.
Absolutely. I mean, the first 4 years I raced here, even the first 2 victories I had, I was just in a road helmet, a standard. They didn't even have aero road helmets. It was just a road helmet. And that's just the evolution of the sport. You know, science and technology, innovation comes in, and I think as an athlete you can either embrace it or get left behind. And I had a formula that had worked, but 2011 gave me an opportunity to look at everything. And
Yes.
I did wear an aero helmet for the first time. I got more aggressive with my bike training and the way I wanted to execute on race day. And I had I think I rode 423 that year. I was second off the bike, and it was a very enjoyable race for that reason. I just got to do things a little differently.
Well, and it's funny because if you look back, early on, Dave Scott was thought of as a swim bike guy, right? Always, if you got a gap on him, he's not a runner. He's too big. Yeah. And so and same with Paula when she won her last title, is she had gone off the front all the time. Well, that time she wanted to mix it up with everybody else, and she ran better. So what did you learn about your ability on the bike? It became, rather than, it's not like you were ever not a great cyclist, but it became a weapon.
Yeah, I think we have a tendency to label and pigeonhole people for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think it makes us feel better about what we're doing if we can label somebody else. And I got labelled as a swim runner.
Yes.
The unique thing about our sport is it's not 3 disciplines in isolation. The way you swim impacts the way you bike, and the way you bike impacts the way you run.
Yes.
And Mark Allen always said it's a closed energy equation. And, I knew the way I could ride. It's just a matter of making decisions on race day to do it differently. And for me, it was a very simple thing. But I was never offended by the labels, or my goal was to perform well. You dealt a certain hand, and you just try and get the most out of your hand. And that's what I did. But it's kind of fun to play a different hand and maybe to bluff once in a while and do whatever you need to do. But the great athletes, and you mentioned them, I think they like the challenge of trying to do things differently. I mean, I was never motivated by trying to prove anyone else wrong, but it's kind of fun to have a different challenge. And the great athletes are always up for those challenges. They can reinvent themselves and find different ways to get a great outcome and have a great race.
So you started working with Dave Scott, I think, after the 07 race. And what did he bring to the table for you?
Oh, everything. I mean, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. Just a completely humble guy who was so generous with his time, wanted to see other people do well, an infectious personality and enthusiasm for the sport, for training, and for this race. Everything. It was infectious being around him. I owe Dave a lot. And then specifically with the strength and conditioning and some of the specific training I needed to do. And also, I think in anything, in sport or in business, if you don't have a specific skill set or a knowledge you outsource, I mean, there weren't too many guys who had raced competitively here into their 30s and 40s. He was one guy who had. So he had the specific knowledge that I needed, and he was gracious enough to share it with me.
So in 2011, not only you come back and win the 3rd title, but you break the course record, which still stands. Take me through that day. You get off the bike, and when did you have a sense that you were going that fast?
I had a sense things were going well from the gun going off. I felt great. I'd won another world title a month before in Las Vegas.
70.3 worlds, yes.
And it had been an interesting year, personally and also professionally. I'd been sick. I hadn't had many injuries or illnesses at all through my career. I got very sick early in the year. I had a respiratory virus. I was really just happy to be out there racing. I know it's a cliche, but they say attitude is everything, and I had such a good attitude that whole year. I was happy to be racing as a 38-year-old on the biggest stage, against the best guys, and won my 4th world title in Las Vegas a month before. And that whole lead-up was so relaxed that year. I just remember everything felt good, and I felt good from when the gun went off. And I just thought I have to carry that momentum into the race. I wasn't thinking I'm going to break the record. I wasn't thinking I'm going to win. I just thought I want to carry this momentum and this attitude into the race. And attitude is everything. It just felt great. And it hurt, but it was a sweet pain. It felt so nice to be out there and being competitive again. And, obviously when you're 38, there's questions about retirement and are you going to be able to compete at that level again? And I was really happy to be there and be competitive and feel so good. I was in a great position. I think I was in the top 5 or 8 out of the water. And I remember heading out past the airport. I was sitting 2nd or 3rd on the bike. And Lieto made a move, and I just said, I'm going with him. So I went. So we're only 15 or 16 miles into it, and
he must have been surprised.
Well, I don't think he didn't look back.
Yeah.
Chris never looked back. He just pinned his ears back and went. So so I went. He had about a 200 or 300 meter gap, and I went, and I didn't look back for about 10 miles. And when I looked back, it was only Marino and Luke McKenzie who had followed, and it was a long way back to the group. And I thought, this is early, but this could be the move. And you never count your chickens before they hatch, especially at a race like this, and especially when you've got Ray Alert, etc., etc. You know, it was a cast of thousands, like
Yes.
it always is here. So I knew the depth of the field. That was the year Andreas had set what I think still stands as the second fastest time ever, 7:40 or 7:41 in Challenge Roth.
Yes.
Marino had done a 7:44 in Austria and run a 2:39. So, you know, the resumes of those boys were in the forefront of my mind, but I thought I'm feeling good and there's an opportunity here, so I'm gonna run with it.
And there was a point there where Raylert was coming in the run.
In the marathon, yes.
And you were able to hold him off.
Well, he was coming, yeah.
Yeah, and you were cramping.
I cramped later, yeah. So he's a phenomenal. I mean, I think he's had 7 podium finishes from 9 starts here.
Yes.
Probably doesn't get the recognition.
It's hard when you don't win, you know?
It is hard. It is. I think his colleagues and his peers, it's like in any sport, the award athletes want is the Players Player award. And I think his peers would rate him as one of the best of his generation. I mean, he went to 2 Olympic Games as a short course athlete, got a medal at his first outing at 70.3 Worlds.
And he probably should have won the 2010 race.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
He probably looks back at a
That's
few
the
of
one.
those races. Yeah, no doubt. But to me, that doesn't diminish him as an athlete. I know from a marketing standpoint, it's all about winning. But I look at his career and I think 6 podium or 7 podium finishes here. For me, that's Hall of Fame material. From 9 starts, that's an incredible strike rate. And he'd done a 7:40 in Roth that year. You know, his reputation preceded, and he's just a gentleman too. He's a great guy. But I knew at some point he would put pressure on, and he did from the very start from the marathon. It was weird because his brother was out there on the course. He's a good friend of mine.
Michael, yeah.
Giving me splits back to his brother. And it was all a little too close to home, but
That's very professional, by the way.
yeah, he's a great guy too. And he was eating into the gap, and I had a plan to race and run a certain way. I thought I was in really good shape. I thought I could break 2:40 in the marathon that year. But I'd worked hard to establish a 4 or 5 minute lead on him off the bike, and he was eating into that lead rapidly. And I did panic a little bit. I panicked because I thought the pace he's running at, he's on pace to run a 2:25 marathon, which the history books would suggest is not going to happen.
But
you never, adrenaline and emotion is an amazing thing. The power of the mind out here. A guy who's desperate to win gets a sniff of winning, and who knows what can happen. That's when you see special things. And I didn't underestimate Andreas and the power of him thinking that today's my day. So I wanted to shut him down. So I changed my race plan to hold him at 2 or 3 minutes. So there was a 10 or 12 mile stretch in the middle of that marathon. It was probably the most painful I've ever run. And he finally blew up, thankfully for me. And I blew up a few miles later. But I was 6 miles from home at that point, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But yes, I did cramp up. It was a very painful way to finish. And I think I was on pace to run 2:38 or 2:39 until 4 miles to go, and then the wheels completely fell off, and I had to stop and walk. I ran out of salt tablets. It's probably the only time I've really cramped in any race, but I was so close to home.
You can see the cramping even in your jump at the finish.
Oh yes. Well, I think I was still cramping a month later after that one. But that was a tough one. But they're the special ones,
Exactly. When I look at, I'm interviewing guys, and I was interviewing somebody yesterday. He's done 43 He's done 43 Ironmans, right? And back in the day, the formula was if you win this race, you get to come next year, and you could decide your own schedule, do a 70.3. If you want to do like Chrissy Wellington and do 20 Ironmans, you can do that.
Yep.
But if you want to be Craig Alexander and say, I'm going to do a couple 70.3s and work on my speed and come over here, I can't. Rule changes, and I look at 2011, where you win 70.3 Worlds, win Ironman, October, in March, Melbourne.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're racing Cam Brown. You end up going 7:57. He goes 8 hours. You run 2:37. He runs 2:39. And 3 world-class performances really in 6 months.
Yeah.
That's hard for the body to have, especially at 38.
Yeah, looking back, it was too many times going too deep into the well. And, you know, the rule did change, and I mean, all I had to do was finish a race, but it wasn't my.
You're not going to go.
It wasn't in my
race.
DNA to
No.
finish. I mean, Melbourne in 2012. It was the first year. It was the Asia Pacific Championships. They named the trophy after Greg Welsh, one of my heroes.
Yes.
Greg was going to be presenting the trophy. I didn't often get to race at home in Australia as the reigning world champion. Most of my racing was overseas, so it was a big deal, and I really wanted to win. So at no point was I going to Melbourne just to validate.
No.
So that was my decision to go there in that shape. But yeah, looking back, I think as a 39-year-old, and that's why I see Jan this year. He's at a different place and very smart with his preparation.
Yes.
And you have to be. But yeah, I spent 10 years in the US racing races like Chicago, LA, Lifetime Fitness in Minnesota.
Yes.
I loved the Olympic distance racing.
Yes.
I loved half Ironman racing. I raced half Ironmans for years before there was actually an officially sanctioned world championship. I used to love races like St. Croix. That was one of my favorites. So I think part of the sport is you want to win world titles, but you also want to do races that light your fire, that you love to do. So I tried to mix my schedule up, some Olympic distance, some half Ironmans, go to some great places, great locations. Neri loved St. Croix. We had great friends there. There's worse places to race in the Caribbean. It's like coming here, right? Hardly feels like work. But yeah, they changed the rule, and
that's just the way it is.
it's the way it is. I don't make any excuses or point the finger. My decision was to go to Melbourne and race very, very hard. But 2012 became very difficult after that, with some injuries and some other things going on. And once again, they're the cards that you dealt. You just got to make the most of it.
And that's always hard, because when you're on and you're healthy, why would you not go to the starting line? That's sort of what you do. My concern is just too many Ironman races in cutting people's careers short.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, I look at guys like Jan and Seb, Ben Hoffman, a lot of these guys, Lionel, and Daniela. I mean, the sport's evolving.
Yes.
And the athletes are getting better. What we know about how to eat, how to recover, how to train is getting better. The equipment, you just got to walk around the expo, the bikes. You got ceramic speed, bearings and chains. Everyone's aero helmets are standard now. But I think the reason the record hasn't been broken is because they are racing harder a lot more often. Maybe that's the reason, because I have no question someone like a Jan or a Seb or a Lionel, given the right conditions, he could go well under 8 hours.
No question.
I mean, we saw last year with Daniela, good conditions, she broke Rinnie's record by over 10 minutes. And you're going to see the same in the men's. It's just the evolution of the event. These guys are rock stars. They're that good. They're so professional, the way they train, and these guys come up through their national federations. Look at Jan. He's just got so much pedigree, such a class athlete. He's one of the all-time greats already, and his career has many chapters still to write. So, but no, I think one of the elements that rule change brought in is you have to be a lot smarter, and the smart athletes will be. The athletes like Jan will sit down with their team next week after here. So they're not thinking past this Saturday.
No.
But next week at some point the dust will settle and they'll sit down and they'll come up with a great plan for the next 12 months.
So when I look at that Melbourne race, I mean, you've had a lot of races in your career, but running side by side with Cam
awesome.
Brown,
That was
was
awesome.
that pretty special? That was like an Iron War type of experience.
That was awesome. I mean, myself, Cam, Frederick Van Leer, Nico Lanos, Luke McKenzie, Joe Gambles, Greg Bennett. That was an awesome race, awesome field. And, the first 10 kilometres, myself, Cam, Nico and Freddie were together.
Yes.
So that's an illustrious little group you got there. And, all pushing the pace. And we're all mates, I guess. Not on the race course, but off the course, we're all good mates. And we've raced each other for a long time. So, and then I think Nico dropped off first. Yeah, it was Nico dropped off about 10 kilometres in. And then Frederick dropped off about halfway. And then it was Cam and I locking horns until about 35K. So I tell you, I breathed a huge sigh of relief when he finally dropped. He had me on the ropes so many times in that race. I thought I was gone, but I just kept getting back. And that's the power of the mind. I wanted to win. I wanted to win the Greg Welsh trophy. So I was like a dog with a bone that day, and I just wouldn't let it go. And but Nico came back the next year and got his revenge. He won the race and ran a 2:41 into a headwind for 42 kilometres. So, but yeah, the 2012 Melbourne's one of my favourite memories for sure.
Love it. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a big round of applause for Mr. Craig Alexander. Love that.
Watching Breakfast with Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
And you guys all pose over there.